I saved $5 in an old piggy bank every week for 15 years. My husband laughed. "Why are you saving these pennies?" But one day, I accidentally discovered a false bottom in the piggy bank. In the secret compartment was $550,000 and a note. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always say that the truth hides in plain sight. I used to roll my eyes at that. I was the kind of woman who believed in hard work, in loyalty, in the idea that if you kept your house clean and your heart open, life would return the favor. I was wrong. But it took me 15 years, a ceramic piggy bank, and $550,000 to figure that out. My name is Carol Whitfield. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, the middle daughter of a man who fixed cars for a living and a woman who stretched a grocery budget like taffy. We weren't poor, but we understood the weight of a dollar. I grew up knowing that money didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't stay unless you held it carefully. That's a lesson my mother gave me without ever saying a word. She just lived it, every single day. I married Daniel Whitfield when I was 28 years old. He was charming in that easy, unhurried way that makes a woman feel safe. He had a good job as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical distributor, drove a clean car, called his mother on Sundays. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue in the summer of 2007, and by the following spring, we were engaged. By fall, we were married at a small ceremony in Columbus with 70 guests and a 3-tiered white cake that tasted like almonds. For the first few years, things were fine. We bought a house in Westerville, a pale yellow colonial with black shutters, and a yard big enough for the dog we eventually got, a golden retriever named Biscuit. I worked as an office manager for a dental practice, which wasn't glamorous but paid steadily and came with good hours. Daniel traveled for work maybe 2 weeks out of every month. We had routines, friends, a life that looked, from the outside, completely ordinary and completely decent. The piggy bank appeared in year 3 of our marriage. I'd found it at a garage sale 3 blocks from our house, a heavy ceramic thing, painted white with a small blue bow around its neck, a coin slot on its back, and a rubber stopper on its belly. It cost me 50 cents. I don't know exactly why I bought it. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was some instinct I couldn't name yet. But I brought it home, set it on the shelf in our bedroom closet, and that same evening I pushed my first $5 bill through the slot. Every Friday after that, I did the same thing. It became a ritual, quiet and private, like brushing your teeth or making the bed. I didn't tell Daniel at first, not out of secrecy, just because it felt personal, like a small corner of the week that belonged only to me. But he noticed eventually, the way husbands notice things they find amusing rather than threatening. "What exactly are you doing with that thing?" he asked one evening, leaning against the doorframe of the closet while I folded laundry. "Saving," I said. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh. At least, it didn't sound cruel then. It was the laugh of a man who thinks something is endearingly silly. $5 a week? Carol, that's barely a tank of gas every 2 months. What's the point? I shrugged. It adds up. He shook his head, still smiling, and walked away. That exchange repeated itself in different forms over the years. Sometimes it was a passing comment. Still feeding the pig? Sometimes it was more pointed. You know, there are actual investment accounts that earn interest, right? This is just nostalgic nonsense. Once at a dinner with friends, he mentioned it as a punchline. Carol has a piggy bank. he said, and everyone laughed, and I smiled, and I felt something small and hard settle in my chest. But I kept going. Every Friday, $5, 15 years. The first real crack appeared in the spring of 2019. Daniel had always been protective of his phone, not aggressively so, just the way some people are, the way it can seem reasonable until suddenly it doesn't. But that March, he started sleeping with it face down on the nightstand, which he'd never done before. He started stepping out of the room to take calls he used to take in front of me. Once I walked into the kitchen while he was texting, and he angled the screen away so naturally, so smoothly, that I almost didn't catch it. I told myself I was imagining things. 11 years of marriage can make you doubt your own instincts, especially when the person you're doubting is good at appearing consistent. Daniel never raised his voice. He never came home drunk. He remembered anniversaries and brought home flowers after long trips and praised my cooking in front of company. He was a good-looking version of a good husband, and that, I think, was the most dangerous part. But something was shifting. I could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Not the storm itself, just the stillness that precedes it. That particular quiet that makes the birds stop singing. Then, on a Thursday evening in October of 2022, everything changed. I was looking for a belt I'd lent Daniel months ago and never gotten back. I was searching the upper shelf of the closet, his side, not mine, when I knocked the piggy bank down from where it had migrated over the years. It hit the carpet with a heavy thud and rolled. I picked it up, and as I turned it over to check for cracks, I noticed something I had never noticed before. A seam. Along the bottom of the base. Too clean to be a manufacturing defect, too deliberate to be an accident. I pressed it, and a small panel shifted. There was a second compartment, and inside it, folded tightly and banded with rubber, were stacks of $100 bills, and beneath the money, a single envelope. My hands were shaking before I even opened it. I sat on the floor of that closet for a long time before I moved. The carpet was rough under my knees. Biscuit was somewhere downstairs, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. The house smelled like the chicken I had left simmering on the stove. Everything around me was completely ordinary, and yet I was holding something that made the ordinary feel like a stage set. A flat painted backdrop that someone had finally let me walk behind. The envelope was plain white, business-sized, unsealed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting was not Daniel's. It was a woman's handwriting. I could tell by the loops, the careful spacing, the small heart drawn at the bottom of the page where a signature should have been. The note said, "For us. For when we're finally ready, don't let her find it. R." 4 sentences, 31 words, the end of 11 years. I read it twice. Then I put it back in the envelope. Then I put the envelope back under the money. Then I pressed the panel closed and sat there with the piggy bank in my lap and the very specific silence of a woman who is working very hard not to scream. Daniel was at a work dinner. He'd told me that morning, casually, the way he always told me things now, as information delivered, not conversation started. He wouldn't be home until 10. I had 2 hours. I got up, went downstairs, turned off the stove, sat at the kitchen table, and started counting. I had thought I knew our finances. That had always been my assumption, not because I managed them closely, but because Daniel had always presented them as stable, as reasonable, as fine. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, and a mortgage with 8 years left on it. He handled most of the investment accounts because, as he had told me countless times, he understood the markets better. I had believed him. I had believed him completely. I pulled out my laptop and opened every account I had access to. The joint savings had $14,200 in it, lower than it should have been for November, but not alarming on its own. The checking looked normal, but when I tried to log into the investment account through our brokerage portal, I got an error message I had never seen before. Access restricted. Please contact account administrator. I stared at that screen for a very long time. Then I went back upstairs, opened the panel again, and counted the money with both hands, bill by bill, the way my mother taught me to count change, slowly, deliberately, starting over if I lost track. $550,000. I counted it 3 times. The number didn't change. I sat back on the carpet and let myself feel it fully. The vertigo of it, the nausea, the way the walls of a room can seem to tilt when the foundation of your life shifts under you without warning. I thought about the dinners I had cooked, the trips I had not taken because he said we should be careful with spending, the new car I'd wanted 3 years ago and talked myself out of because he said the timing wasn't right, the Friday evenings I'd stood in that closet and pushed $5 through the slot of a ceramic pig and told myself that it added up. It did add up, and apparently so had his secrets. Who was R? The question came quietly, the way important questions sometimes do, not with anger yet, just with a cold, surgical clarity. Someone with careful handwriting and a heart drawn where her name should have been. Someone who had written for us, and when we're finally ready, as if there was a timeline, a plan, an entire future being constructed on the other side of my marriage without my knowledge. I thought about the phone face down on the nightstand, the calls taken in other rooms, the dinner tonight. Was it a work dinner? Had it ever been just a work dinner? I could feel myself reaching the edge of panic, and I made a decision, right there on that carpet, that I was not going to go over that edge. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because panic was what they would expect. Panic was the reaction of a woman who had been blindsided, who would cry and confront and demand answers in the heat of the moment and thereby give away every advantage she had. I had one advantage right now, and it was a precious one. Daniel did not know that I had found this. He believed it was hidden. He believed I was downstairs making chicken. I put the money back. I closed the panel. I put the piggy bank back on the shelf, his side, exactly where it had been, at the same angle, against the same wall. I went downstairs, turned the stove back on, and finished making dinner. When Daniel came home at 10:15, I poured him a glass of water, asked how the dinner had gone, and listened to him describe a restaurant I had never heard of with a warmth that cost me more than he would ever know. "You okay?" he asked at one point, looking at me over his glass. "You seem quiet." "Just tired," I said. He nodded, satisfied, and went to brush his teeth. That night, lying in the dark beside him, I built my plan. I needed to know 2 things: where that money came from and where it was supposed to go. The note said for when we're finally ready. That meant there was a timeline. That meant Daniel was planning something. An exit, a disappearance, a new life built on the ruins of the one we had made together. And if I was going to protect myself, I needed to move before he did. Step 1. I needed a lawyer. Not a friend's recommendation, not a name from the internet, a specific kind of lawyer. A divorce attorney who specialized in hidden assets, someone who had seen exactly this before and knew what to do with it. Step 2. I needed to document everything I had found without touching it again, without disturbing it. Photographs, timestamps, a record. Step 3. I needed to be invisible, for as long as it took. I pressed my face into the pillow and breathed slowly. Outside, a car passed. Biscuit shifted at the foot of the bed. Daniel slept beside me with the peaceful, even breathing of a man with an untroubled conscience, or a very practiced one. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I had not called in sick in 4 years. My boss, Dr. Ellerman, sounded surprised but unconcerned. "Feel better, Carol." And that was that. Daniel had already left for the office by the time I made the call. He kissed me on the cheek on his way out, briefcase in hand, and I stood in the doorway and watched his car back out of the driveway and felt, for the first time in 15 years, that I was watching him leave as a stranger. I gave it 20 minutes. Then I went back upstairs. I photographed the panel with my phone, first the outside of the piggy bank showing the seam, then the panel open, then the money in place, then the note in my gloved hand. I used the rubber gloves I kept under the kitchen sink. I wasn't sure why exactly. Some instinct toward preservation, toward keeping evidence clean. I thought, if this ever ends up in a courtroom, every detail matters. I uploaded the photos to a Google account Daniel did not know existed. I had created it 3 years ago when I first started feeling uneasy and couldn't name why. Just a new email address, used for nothing, stored in my memory and nowhere else. A small private drawer in a life I was only beginning to understand wasn't truly mine. Then I put everything back, stripped off the gloves, and drove to the other side of Columbus. I had found the attorney's name the week before, or rather, I had started looking the week before without knowing why. The same instinct that had made me photograph the panel, the same low-frequency alarm that had been running under my ordinary life for years. Her name was Patricia Hale, and her practice was on the east side of town, far enough from our neighborhood that I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. She specialized in high-conflict divorce and financial fraud. Her reviews described her as methodical, unsentimental, and quietly ruthless. These were the qualities I needed. Her office was on the second floor of a brick building that smelled like coffee and old carpeting. Her assistant, a young man with a careful expression, offered me water and then left me to wait in a chair that was, somehow, both expensive and uncomfortable. Patricia Hale was in her early 50s, with short silver hair and the composed face of someone who had heard every version of every story and was therefore impossible to shock. She shook my hand, sat across from me, and said simply, "Tell me what happened." So I told her, all of it. The piggy bank, the panel, the money, the note, the brokerage account I'd been locked out of, the phone face down on the nightstand. 15 years. She listened without interrupting, without expression, taking occasional notes in a small leather journal. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, "you did the right thing by not confronting him. That matters a great deal." "How bad is it?" I asked. "Legally, how bad?" She exhaled slowly. "If the money represents undisclosed marital assets, which it appears to, your husband may be liable for intentional dissipation. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which means you're entitled to a fair share of all marital assets, including any he may have concealed. The existence of that note, the reference to planning, is also significant. It suggests premeditation. And the brokerage account? That's potentially more serious. If he's restructured joint accounts without your knowledge or consent, that could constitute financial abuse. We'll need to subpoena the records. I left Patricia Hale's office with a signed retainer and a list of documents to gather quietly over the coming weeks. Bank statements, tax returns, any mail that came addressed to Daniel, any financial documents in the house I could photograph without removing. I drove home feeling like a different person than the one who had driven there. That evening, Daniel was home for dinner. He was cheerful. He'd closed a good account, he said, something about a hospital group in Cincinnati. I made pasta, we ate at the kitchen table, we talked about whether to repaint the back fence before winter. Everything was exactly the same as it had always been, and yet I was watching him from a distance I had never had before, with eyes that had been calibrated to a new frequency. 3 days later, Patricia called. "I found something," she said. "You're going to want to come in." I drove back to the brick building on the east side of town. Patricia was waiting for me with a printed document on her desk. She slid it across to me. It was a deed of trust. A property in Scottsdale, Arizona. A condominium, 1,400 square feet, purchased 14 months ago. The registered owner was listed as Daniel Aaron Whitfield. The co-signatory was listed as Rachel Ann Doyle. There was a photograph attached, pulled from the county assessor's website. A woman with dark hair and a wide smile standing outside a glass-front building, squinting slightly in the Arizona sun. I had never seen her before in my life. "He bought it during your marriage," Patricia said, "with funds we haven't traced yet. That makes it a marital asset he deliberately concealed." I sat with the document in my hands and felt something solidify inside me. Not anger, exactly, but something colder and more durable than anger. Something that would last. "What do we do next?" I asked. Patricia folded her hands on her desk. "Now," she said, "we take him apart, piece by piece." The subpoena went out the first week of November. I was not in the courtroom when it was filed. I was at work, managing appointment schedules and insurance claims, answering the phone, making coffee, doing everything I had always done, with the same face I had always worn. Only Patricia and I knew that the financial records of Daniel Aaron Whitfield's brokerage account were now being compelled by a court of law. I gave it 4 days. On a Thursday evening, Daniel came home from work and his face was wrong. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was very carefully not angry, which was something different entirely. He came into the kitchen where I was making tea and stood in the doorway for a moment watching me, and there was a calculation happening behind his eyes that he wasn't quite able to hide. "Something at work?" I asked, looking up. "Rough day," he said. "Nothing serious." He went upstairs. I heard him open the closet. I heard a pause, longer than it needed to be, and then the sound of the closet door closing again. He knew I'd found it, or he suspected. He wasn't sure yet. The money was still there. I had left it untouched. The panel showed no signs of disturbance, but something had changed in the atmosphere of the house, and Daniel was smart enough to feel it, even if he couldn't identify its source. The following Saturday, his sister called me. Her name was Donna. We had never been close, but we were civil. Christmas dinners, birthday calls, the functional politeness of family by marriage. She asked how I was. I told her fine, and then she said in a casual tone that was not casual at all, "I heard through the grapevine that you've been talking to someone, a lawyer." I let a beat of silence pass. "Who told you that?" "I just want to make sure everything's okay with you two. Daniel mentioned you seem distant." "Everything's fine, Donna," I said. "Carol." Her voice dropped. "I'm just saying, whatever you think is going on, maybe it's worth a conversation before you do something you can't take back. You know how these things escalate." I thanked her for calling and hung up. So Daniel had already mobilized. He had called his sister, perhaps his mother too, perhaps friends, laying the groundwork, constructing a narrative in which I was the irrational one, the one doing something drastic without cause. It was a smart move. I would have expected nothing less. What came next was less expected. On a Tuesday evening 2 weeks into November, a man I didn't recognize knocked on our front door. He was in his 40s, well-dressed, and he handed me a letter that had the name of a law firm I didn't recognize across the top. He was gone before I finished reading the first paragraph. It was a cease and desist letter. Daniel's attorney, a firm called Grantham and Pollard, was alleging that I had illegally accessed private financial documents and was threatening civil action if I did not agree to a negotiated settlement within 30 days. The letter was designed to frighten. It was full of legal-sounding language about unauthorized financial access and emotional distress and the costs of prolonged litigation. I photographed it and texted Patricia. She called me within the hour. "This is intimidation," she said flatly. "Standard tactic when the other side knows they're exposed. Do not respond, do not engage. Let me handle this." "He knows," I said. "Yes, and knowing means he's scared. Scared people make mistakes." I was standing in the kitchen again when Daniel came home that evening. He saw my face and understood that I had received the letter, and for the first time in our marriage, we stopped pretending. "Carol," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "This is not what you think it is." "I found the deed," I said. "Scottsdale. Rachel Doyle's name on the paperwork. I know about the brokerage account. I know about the $550,000 in the compartment you built into the bottom of the piggy bank." The color left his face in sections, like a tide going out. "That money is not yours." "It is a marital asset concealed without my consent," I said. "That's what my attorney says, and the court seems to agree, which is why they issued the subpoena." He stepped toward me. Not threatening, but close enough that it was meant to remind me of the difference in our sizes. "You need to stop this," he said. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," I said. He left the room. He spent that night in the guest bedroom, the first time in 15 years, and by morning he was gone before I woke up. I called Patricia and told her what had happened. Then I called my sister in Cincinnati and asked if I could spend a few days. I needed to breathe. I had taken the first blow, absorbed it, answered it, and now I needed 3 days away from that house, away from that closet and that ceiling and those walls, to remember who I was outside of the role I'd been playing. My sister Ellen asked no questions. She just said, "Come." I drove to Cincinnati that afternoon with Biscuit in the back seat and nothing but a sense of strange, quiet relief. Ellen's house was a 2-bedroom Craftsman on a quiet street in Hyde Park, and it smelled like strong coffee and the lavender candles she kept on every windowsill. She had been divorced herself 6 years earlier. A clean, mutually agreed-upon separation that had left her, if anything, lighter. She understood things without having them explained. I slept for 11 hours the first night. I hadn't realized how tired I was until I was somewhere safe enough to feel it. Biscuit settled immediately into Ellen's couch, which he was not allowed on at home. I let him stay. The calls started on the second day. Daniel called at 8 a.m. I watched the phone ring and let it go to voicemail. The message, when I listened to it later, was careful, measured, almost tender. He said he was worried about me. He said he missed me. He said he thought we could work through this if we just sat down and talked without attorneys involved. He said he loved me. He said it 3 more times over the course of that day, in 3 more messages, with the same careful calibration, the same warmth dialed to exactly the right temperature. I sent Patricia all 4 voicemails and then put the phone face down on Ellen's kitchen table. "He's love-bombing you," Ellen said, handing me a coffee. "That's what they call it. Classic." "I know what it is," I said. "Does it work?" I thought about it honestly. It makes me sad, I said. Not for me, for whoever I thought he was, for 15 years of thinking I understood what I was living inside. That's grief, Ellen said. That's allowed. And it was. I let myself grieve it. 3 days in Ellen's house, walking biscuit along the river path, sitting with coffee while the October light came through the curtains, feeling the whole enormous weight of a life I had misread, and beginning, slowly, to set it down. On the 3rd day, something else happened. A woman named Linda Gaines called my cell phone from a number I didn't recognize. She said she'd gotten my number from Patricia Hale's office, that Patricia had given it to her with my permission, which I had given in a general way when I'd signed the paperwork. Linda Gaines, it turned out, was a forensic accountant who specialized in marital financial fraud. "Your attorney thinks we should talk," she said. Her voice was brisk, professional, no nonsense in the way of someone who worked with numbers all day and trusted them more than people. "I've reviewed the preliminary documents. There's more here than you know yet." "How much more?" I asked. "The $550 in the compartment is just one pocket," she said. "There are at least 2 others we've identified so far. I need to go through 3 more years of tax records to give you a full picture. But Mrs. Whitfield, you may be looking at assets significantly beyond what was visible in the piggy bank." I sat with that information for a long moment. "How is that possible?" I asked. "Pharmacy distribution is a high-margin business," she said simply. "Your husband has been processing some of his commission income through a secondary LLC he registered in Delaware 6 years ago. It's not illegal on its own, but using those funds to purchase property without your knowledge while you're a married couple is. We're currently identifying 3 real estate purchases, 2 of which predate the Scottsdale property. 3 properties, an LLC, 6 years. I sat at Ellen's kitchen table and looked at the lavender candle burning on the windowsill and understood that the architecture of my marriage had been constructed in a way I was only now beginning to see clearly, and that it was far larger and far more deliberately hidden than even I had imagined. "Thank you, Linda," I said. "Tell me everything you need from me." We spoke for an hour. I took notes on the back of an envelope, dates, account numbers, names of institutions. Linda was precise and practical and made me feel, for the first time since the closet floor, that I had competent people on my side who would not be outmaneuvered. That evening, Ellen and I sat on her porch in the cool air, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I was done, she poured us each a small glass of bourbon and said, "Carol, you are going to win this." "You think?" "You have the receipts," she said. "You have the lawyer, you have the accountant, you have the note in her handwriting, you have the deed in both their names. What does he have?" "A very expensive attorney," I said. "Right," Ellen said, "but expensive attorneys can't make evidence disappear." I drove home to Westerville the next morning feeling something I had not expected to feel so soon. A low, steady confidence, like a flame that had settled past the point of flickering. Not the hot confidence of anger, something slower, more permanent. Daniel's car was not in the driveway when I arrived. He had been staying with his mother, I later found out. The house was exactly as I had left it. Biscuit's water bowl in the kitchen, my tea mug on the counter, the piggy bank on the closet shelf where it had always been. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment, looking at the closet. How many times had I stood here? I thought. How many Fridays had I pushed $5 through that slot without knowing what it sat on top of? The answer was 780 times. I had counted once, idly on a quiet night a few years ago. 780 weeks of $5, and not once had I looked down. but I was looking now. They came on a Saturday. I hadn't expected them to come together, Daniel and his mother, Margaret, arriving in her silver Buick at 11 in the morning, pulling into the driveway like an ordinary family visit. Margaret Whitfield was 71 years old, a small woman with rigid posture and the particular confidence of someone who had spent decades getting what she wanted by expecting it rather than asking for it. She had never particularly liked me, and I had always known it, in the way women know things that nobody says out loud. I watched them through the kitchen window for a moment before I opened the door. "Carol," Daniel said when I let them in. He was wearing the jacket I had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. A deliberate choice, I thought. We just wanted to talk, that's all. Margaret sat down at my kitchen table without being invited and clasped her hands in front of her. I made tea because it gave my hands something to do. "I know this has been hard on you," Margaret began. "Truly I do. Marriage is complicated. Daniel has made mistakes." "Margaret," I said, setting a cup in front of her, "he purchased a condominium in Arizona with another woman and stored $550,000 in a hidden compartment in an object he placed in our bedroom closet. I'm going to need you to be more specific about which mistakes we're discussing." Her expression shifted slightly. "Just a fraction, just enough." "You're looking at this in a very black and white way," she said. "Relationships are nuanced. Daniel is a good man who got confused." "Confused?" I repeated. "He loves you," she said. "That has never changed." Daniel leaned forward from his chair. "Carol, what you're doing, the legal process, the subpoenas, do you understand what this does to both of us? To the house? To our credit? We could lose everything in legal fees alone if this goes to trial. I'm asking you to sit down with a mediator. No courtrooms, no attorneys, just us, working it out." "The way we worked out the brokerage accounts I didn't know you'd restructured," I said. "Or the way we worked out the LLC in Delaware. Or the 3 properties, Daniel. Which of those conversations did we have?" The temperature in the room changed. Margaret's composure cracked just slightly, a tightening around the eyes that told me she had not known about all of it. 3 properties. She had known about some of it, perhaps, but not everything. I filed that away. "You are making a mistake," Daniel said, and his voice had changed now. The warmth gone, the careful tenderness stripped back. "You think you're protected, but you don't know what this process actually looks like. Patricia Hale is a good attorney, but Grantham and Pollard have handled 50 cases like this. They will bury you in motions until you run out of money to pay her, and then you will settle for a fraction of what you think you're entitled to. I'm giving you a chance to avoid that." "You're giving me a chance," I said. "Yes." "And what does this chance look like, exactly?" He straightened. "You drop the legal proceedings. We sell the Westerville house, split the proceeds 50-50. I keep the other assets and you keep yours. Clean, fast, no public record of any of this." I looked at him. Then I looked at his mother. Then I looked back at him. "Daniel," I said, "the $550,000 alone makes your offer laughable. And that's before we discuss the LLCs and the properties. Patricia tells me we're currently looking at a total of approximately $2 million in undisclosed marital assets. You want to give me half of a house worth $380. I want you to think about whether that sounds like something I would agree to." The silence was complete. Margaret stood up. "You are being very foolish," she said, in the tone of someone delivering a verdict. "You were given every advantage in this marriage. Everything you have, Daniel provided." "Including the secret compartment," I said. Her face went red. She turned to Daniel. "Let's go." He stood but paused at the doorway. "This isn't over," he said. "Not a threat, exactly. Or not only a threat." There was something else in his voice, a kind of desperation he was trying to hide inside a warning. "No," I agreed. "It's not." I closed the door behind them and stood in the hallway and let myself feel afraid, because I was. The fear was real. Grantham and Pollard were real. The threat of protracted litigation was real. The possibility that Daniel's resources could outlast my resolve was real. I held it in my chest without trying to argue it away, and then, beneath the fear, I found what had been sitting there for weeks, something harder, darker, more durable. The memory of 780 Fridays, the memory of his laugh, nostalgic nonsense, the memory of the note. Don't let her find it. She had found it, and she was not going to let go. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday in February. Patricia had prepared me for 3 weeks. We had gone through every document, every financial record Linda Gaines had assembled, every photograph I had taken in that closet on that October morning. And there were more documents now than I could have imagined when I'd first sat on that carpet with a ceramic pig in my lap. Linda's full report ran to 61 pages. It itemized the Delaware LLC, 3 real estate purchases totaling $1.4 million, undisclosed commission income over 6 years, and the $550,000 in the compartment. All cross-referenced with tax returns that Daniel had filed jointly, in which none of it appeared. "He signed those returns," Patricia said. "And so did you. The difference is that he knew what was missing from them and you didn't. That distinction matters enormously." The deposition was held in a conference room at a law firm downtown, neutral ground. Daniel arrived with 2 attorneys from Grantham and Pollard, a lead named Harmon, silver-haired and aggressive, and a junior associate who carried the documents. Rachel Doyle had been subpoenaed separately and was not present. I knew she had hired her own attorney. Daniel sat across the table from me for the first time since that night in the kitchen when I had named everything I knew. He looked composed. He looked like he had prepared for this. He had the slightly over-careful expression of a man who has been coached extensively on how to appear. Patricia opened with the tax returns. The deposition lasted 4 hours. I watched, from my side of the table, as Patricia walked Daniel through 6 years of financial decisions with the unhurried precision of someone who has done this many times and knows that patience is the sharpest instrument in the room. The first crack appeared 40 minutes in. Harmon objected repeatedly to questions about the LLC. Patricia overruled the objections with documentation, registration filings, operating agreements, bank records showing transfers from the LLC to the Scottsdale property account. Each piece of paper landed on the table like a small, irrefutable weight. "Mr. Whitfield," Patricia said at one point, holding a bank statement, "can you explain this transfer of $87,000 from the Meridian Holdings account to an account registered in Rachel Doyle's name in March of 2021? Daniel looked at Harmon. Harmon looked at the document. "My client is not obligated," Harmon began. "It's a direct question about a documented transfer," Patricia said pleasantly. "Mr. Whitfield." "It was a loan," Daniel said. "A loan?" "Yes. Documented with a promissory note?" A pause. "We had an informal agreement." "I see," said Patricia. "And the Scottsdale condominium, was that also a loan?" The room was very quiet. "It was an investment," Daniel said. "In a property jointly titled with Ms. Doyle, purchased with funds from an LLC you did not disclose to your spouse on 6 years of jointly filed tax returns. He stopped. "Mr. Whitfield? I want to take a break," he said. Harmon called a 15-minute recess. I sat with Patricia in the hallway outside the conference room, and she poured me a glass of water from a pitcher on a side table, and I drank it and looked at the gray winter sky through the window and thought about nothing at all. "He's going to try to restructure his answer after the break," Patricia murmured. "It won't help. The documentation doesn't allow for restructuring." She was right. When we resumed, Daniel's answers became shorter, more careful, and, paradoxically, more damaging. Each qualification he introduced contradicted something he had said 20 minutes earlier. Harmon intervened frequently, which slowed the pace but couldn't stop it. The moment that broke him entirely came from an unexpected direction. Patricia slid a photograph across the table. It was a screenshot of a text message, extracted from the phone records Linda had obtained through the subpoena process. It was dated 11 months earlier, sent from Daniel's number to a number registered to Rachel Ann Doyle. It read, "Carol has no idea. She's been putting $5 a week in that thing for years. She doesn't even know what's underneath it. We're good." I had not seen this text before. Patricia had held it for exactly this moment. The silence in the room was unlike any silence I had ever heard. It was the silence of something that could not be taken back, could not be reframed, could not be softened or explained away. Daniel looked at the text. Then he looked at me, and I looked back at him without blinking. Without anger, without tears, without anything at all except the calm certainty of a woman who has waited long enough and is now precisely where she intended to be. Harmon leaned toward Daniel and murmured something. Daniel shook his head once, a very small motion. "I think," Harmon said in a voice carefully stripped of all its earlier aggression, "my client may be amenable to discussing a settlement framework." Patricia smiled, a small, professional, entirely unsurprised smile. "Of course," she said. "We'd be happy to discuss that." She looked at me. I gave the smallest nod. Outside, the February sky was the pale, washed-out blue of the last of winter. Spring was 3 weeks away. I could feel it coming. The settlement negotiations lasted 11 days. Grantham and Pollard came in with an opening offer that was, as Patricia put it, insulting in a way that almost impresses me. They proposed splitting the Westerville house, returning the $550,000 from the compartment, and offering a lump sum of $150,000 against the remaining assets with a non-disclosure agreement attached. Patricia sent back a counter in writing that I still have a copy of because I keep it in a file I look at sometimes when I need to remember who I became. Our counter: full equitable share of all disclosed and undisclosed marital assets, as identified by Linda Gaines's forensic accounting report. This included the Westerville house, the $550,000, the Scottsdale condominium, valued at $640,000 at current market, the other 2 real estate properties, combined value $890,000, the contents of the Delaware LLC accounts, $480,000 at the time of filing, and a portion of Daniel's vested retirement accounts, plus legal fees. No NDA. Grantham and Pollard came back with a counter that closed some of the gap. Patricia responded by informing them that we were prepared to file a formal complaint with the Ohio Department of Taxation regarding the 6 years of misrepresented joint returns, a matter that would expose Daniel to potential criminal liability under state law entirely separate from the civil proceedings. The second counter from Grantham and Pollard arrived the following morning. It was close enough to our position that Patricia sat across from me and said simply, "I recommend accepting." I read it carefully. Then I read it again. The Westerville house would be sold. I would receive 60% of the proceeds. The $550,000 would be returned to the marital estate and divided with me, receiving 60%. The Scottsdale condominium would be liquidated. I would receive 50% of its value. The 2 additional properties would be liquidated. I would receive 50% of their combined value. The Delaware LLC would be dissolved, and its remaining assets split evenly. I would receive a structured settlement covering the value of Daniel's vested retirement accounts that I would have been entitled to under full disclosure. Daniel would cover all legal fees. Total value to me, as Linda calculated it within the hour, approximately $1.6 million, distributed over 18 months as the properties sold and accounts were liquidated. And the taxes? I asked. The state complaint was quietly resolved, Patricia said, in exchange for full financial disclosure and payment of back taxes with penalties. He will owe the state of Ohio approximately $220,000 in back taxes and fees. He is paying that separately. I signed the settlement agreement on a Wednesday afternoon in March at a table in Patricia's office, with afternoon light coming through the windows and a cup of tea going cold at my elbow. Daniel signed at Grantham and Pollard's offices, across town, at roughly the same time. I was told he did not speak much. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later, in a brief proceeding that required approximately 12 minutes of courtroom time. I walked out of the Franklin County Courthouse into a clear April morning, and Patricia shook my hand on the steps, and I thanked her, genuinely, thoroughly, with the gratitude of someone whose life has been returned to them. And then I drove home. Not to the house in Westerville. We had listed it 3 weeks earlier. I was living in a rented apartment near Bexley, a second-floor place with tall windows and a small balcony where Biscuit could sit in the sun and I could drink my coffee in the morning without anything reminding me of what I'd lost. What had I lost? I sometimes asked myself in those early weeks. The question was worth asking. I had lost a marriage, yes. I had lost 15 years of a life I had believed was real. I had lost the yellow house with the black shutters, the neighbor who always waved, the specific shape of an ordinary Thursday evening. But I had found out who I was when the stage set fell down. And what I found was someone steadier than I had known, someone with a longer patience and a clearer eye than I had ever needed to use before. Rachel Doyle, I later heard, ended the relationship with Daniel within 2 months of the settlement. The Scottsdale condominium, in which she had apparently invested her own savings alongside his, was liquidated as part of the proceedings. She was not a villain to me. She was a woman who had made choices I hadn't known to protect myself against, but she had not come out ahead either. Daniel moved into a 1-bedroom rental in Dublin after the settlement. He was, from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, managing, paying his back taxes in installments. The pharmaceutical company had been, evidently, informed of the Delaware LLC and its purposes. He had resigned before he was asked to. He called me once, 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a message. I sold the Piggy bank at a garage sale that summer for 50 cents. Exactly what I had paid for it 30 years ago, or something close enough to feel like symmetry. The woman who bought it was young, maybe 30, with a toddler balanced on her hip. She turned it over in her hands and smiled. "Heavy," she said. "It is," I agreed. She didn't know about the panel. I hadn't mentioned it. Some things you leave for the next person to find. Summer came early that year, and I drove to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings and bought flowers I had no practical reason to buy. I walked Biscuit along the river path in the evenings. I planted tomatoes on the balcony in mismatched pots and managed to produce by September a single tomato that I ate standing over the sink and found unreasonably satisfying. I started slowly to remember what I had wanted before I had organized my life around someone else's truth. I enrolled in a part-time financial literacy course at Columbus State, not to become an advisor, just to fill in the gap Daniel had exploited for 6 years. I turned out to be good at it. My instructor told me so in the 3rd week, and I walked to my car feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, competent in a way that belonged entirely to me. The $1.6 million came in over 18 months. I was careful with it, deliberately, with intention. I kept a separate account, padded and untouched, labeled simply as emergency. The first financial thing in 15 years that was completely mine. I left the dental practice and took a position with a nonprofit helping women navigate financial abuse. By the end of the 2nd year, I was managing a team of 4. I was glad every morning when I got in the car to drive there. Biscuit slowed down the way golden retrievers do, with great gentleness. On cold nights, I let him sleep in the bed, and he settled in with a sigh of such satisfaction that I laughed out loud in the dark. Daniel rebuilt something modest. Smaller company, lower pay, still renting. Rachel Doyle moved to Phoenix, having lost her own savings in the Scottsdale deal. When I thought about her, it wasn't with anger, just tired recognition. One Sunday, I was on the balcony with coffee, Biscuit asleep at my feet, tomatoes growing in their mismatched pots, and I realized, between one breath and the next, that I was happy. Not performed happiness, not the relief of survival, just quiet, earned happiness, the kind that lives in coffee and sunlight and a dog who sighs like the world is exactly right. One Friday at a time, $5 a week, 15 years. The truth had been hiding in plain sight. I had just finally been ready to find it. People asked me afterward whether I regretted the 15 years. I did not. They taught me who I was when everything fell apart. They taught me that patience is not weakness, that silence can be a strategy, and that the slowest kind of courage, the kind that keeps going without applause, is the only kind that lasts. I saved $5 a week for 15 years. My husband thought it was nothing. He was wrong about what it was, and wrong about who I was, and those 2 mistakes cost him everything. What would you have done? Walked away or stayed long enough to take everything back?